Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth.
Hello and welcome to the Family Beacon podcast. You're with your hosts, Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Thank you so much for joining us. The Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council is where you can get the facts so that you can stand for truth. Here's a little taste of what we'll be talking about today. So the most exciting thing is that we are approaching June 24th, 2023, which will be the first anniversary of the Dobbs v. Jackson decision.
That's right.
That demolished Roe v. Wade and affirmed that our U.S. Constitution has no right to abortion in it.
Whoop. We didn't just overturn Roe v. Wade. We hit it with a baseball bat.
Absolutely, until it was dead. So that's really exciting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll talk about what's happened in the years since then, including nationally and in Minnesota. We'll also be talking about some leaked recordings recently showing how folks at the Minnesota Department of Education are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs on some gender issues.
Shocking.
We're really surprised to hear that, and that will be the substance of this week's episode. But just as with every week, we'll finish with a Bible verse. So I want to talk firstly, Grace, about a statement that we made. And this isn't just like, wow, MFC made a statement. But I want to say this because I think it's an encapsulation of how we feel as an organization about Dobbs. When you take Dobbs and how great that is, but then you look at what happened in Minnesota this past year and how, there was some regrettable legislation that was passed. So I'll just read this and we could talk about that very short. The Dobbs decision has already saved thousands of lives. Grace will talk more about that in our region and across the country. Progressives in Minnesota are trying to turn the clock back and strip protections from women and preborn children in Minnesota. In the long run, their efforts will fail, and Minnesota will join our neighboring states in recognizing the humanity of the most vulnerable Minnesotans, children in the womb, and extending them the legal protections they deserve. So that's our goal, and it's our firm conviction. It's not just something we plucked out of the sky, but something that we believe will happen. And so we ask you guys to work with us on that. In the beginning of that statement, I said that Dobbs saved thousands of lives. Grace, tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the evidence is so crystal clear. I mean, the abortion bans that we were able to pass in so many different states in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade's downfall, they're really working in so many states like Texas, states like Florida that we know and love. I mean, over 24,000 babies have been saved from abortions. So that is just incredible. That's just between July 2022 and March 2023. Wow. That is just incredible. Absolutely incredible. I mean, so many lives saved. And so despite the fact that in states like Minnesota, unfortunately, yes, there are increased abortions here because people are flocking to our state. In total, the net abortions are very much down in the U.S. So that is truly something to celebrate because, I mean, every life counts, right? And so Absolutely. We are so grateful for that. And it's just amazing. Like what a year it has been. I can't believe it's been a full year of accomplished.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that Dobbs was decided?
Yeah, I was, guys, do you remember where I was?
Yeah. No, I don't remember where you were.
Okay, yeah. So I should tell the story really quick. So I was at the DMV getting my updated, updating my ID. And so I was waiting in line and there were several police officers in there because just like security reasons. I was checking my phone because I was like, oh, the decision could come today. I didn't think it was going to come that day. I thought it was going to come the next week. So when I saw the decision, I froze for a minute and then I started crying and my dad was actually outside the DMV waiting for me. So I ran out with the phone in my hand, like tears streaming down my face. And the police officer came after me. He was like, ma'am, are you okay? Are you okay? Because he thought I was not okay. And I was like, everything's fine. This is the best day of my life. Roe v. Wade has just been overturned. And he looked at me blankly. My dad was like, Grace, are you okay? Because I came booking it. He said that he thought that someone had like started shooting in there or something because my face was so crazy. He'd never seen my face like that.
Oh my goodness.
I was sobbing. It was amazing. And then I drove to the office super fast and wrote my speech for that day. Moses,
Yes.
I think you were on vacation, weren't you?
I was on vacation.
Bummer.
Great timing. So honestly, like I was so busy that day because media interviews and so forth. But I was visiting friends in Idaho, and it was like they have this beautiful house on a hill, and you can look out and you can see the sky, and it's just like. It was just such a great, I mean, I wish I was here, honestly, but it was just such a great place to be and experience that moment. And they had an extra bedroom for me to use as my office, which was great because I was just typing and doing Zoom interviews with media outlets all over the country for like the rest of that day. So that was really cool.
We divided and conquered, truly.
And then Grace headlined this amazing Dobbs Day rally and killed it. You guys can go back and watch her speech, which was exceptional. So it was an amazing day. And the thing about it is, I think that we can't let certain developments in the legal arena or in the policy arena, we can't let those things get us down. Things that have happened since Dobbs, and I have a couple reasons, but I'll just keep it short. So I want to share some polling from Gallup from last week.
Oh yeah, do it.
So this is like, Gallup, one of the most respected pollsters in the country. This isn't a right wing or a left wing organization. And a National Review shared this polling data. This morning, Gallup released the results of the abortion questions that were included in their annual Values and Beliefs survey. The findings indicate that 41% of Americans identify as pro-life. This is an increase of 4 percentage points from last year's Gallup poll. So we're talking about 41 minus 4, that's 37, I think. I'm so bad at math.
Wow.
So we're talking about a significant, that is what they call a statistically significant increase from 37 to 41%. And we're hearing, because remember what we're hearing. So that's not a huge change, but that's a change in the right direction, because what we're hearing, Grace, is that people are becoming super pro-abortion. Suddenly everyone loves Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, truly. You're so right.
Yeah, and people are saying that about Minnesota. They're saying that about places everywhere in the country. And that fact is, it's just wrong. Additionally, since last year, the percentage of Americans who felt that abortion was morally wrong has increased also to 41%. So people who believe abortion is morally wrong, 41%. People who believe that they're pro-life, 41%. And then I don't have the number in front of me of who's undecided in that poll. Maybe it's 5-10% of the population. So again, there's no pro-abortion majority. There's no pro-Planned Parenthood, pro-abortion until the moment of birth majority. That doesn't exist. It's never existed. It will never exist. Abortion is morally wrong. An increasing number of our countrymen are believing that. And Dobbs is part of that. And the many state laws that Grace alluded to. And it's also going to be part of the solution in Minnesota. So I think we can say confidently that life is winning.
Amen. Love that. So encouraging, honestly. Speaking of abortion in Minnesota, and of course, we're so grateful for that victory. We're going to keep fighting, though. I mean, that's like winning a battle, but we haven't won the war yet. So we have a lot of other fronts to fight on. So let's talk about what's happening in Minnesota right now. Let's talk about a recent NPR article. Let's talk about how the Minnesota Democrats, they say they have a game plan, but then they don't really have a game plan. But no matter what they end up doing, we're going to be fighting against them because they are trying to support abortion. Guess what? Surprise, surprise. They're trying to support that on the next ballot, right, Moses?
Absolutely. So, Minnesota Public Radio had an article, and the title of the article was really instructive. It was Anger to Action, and then there was the rest of the title. But I thought that was an interesting phrase. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it interviewed, one pro-life person and 5, 6, 8 pro-abortion people, including House Speaker Melissa Hortman and Megan Peterson, who's the executive director of the abortion access advocacy group Gender Justice, which we've talked about on this podcast before. So Megan Peterson says, we have removed basically all the restrictions on abortion in Minnesota. Remember, she's bragging, right?
Yep.
She's not saying this regretfully. She's saying this as something amazing that she personally, well, I'm not, perhaps not personally, but her organization and other organizations like it literally bullied legislators into voting for this legislation. She says, so that's very exciting to have succeeded at restoring abortion as part of healthcare. Abortion has never been healthcare. There's no such thing as restoring abortion as healthcare.
Right.
And to be treated in our laws the same way that any other pregnancy-related healthcare is treated. One tiny little difference, Grace, which is that abortion kills a human being, and
tiny difference.
Nothing else to do with pregnancy care, like an ultrasound or anything like that. None of those things kill a human being. So that would just be a slight difference that Megan Peterson needs to wake up and smell the coffee and realize that. So the article says abortion access advocates said they came away with just about everything they wanted, which really tells you exactly where the DFL in Minnesota, where they're getting their marching orders.
That's a good point.
They're getting their marching orders from the abortion lobby. This was, as we've talked about before, the PRO Act was their first priority this session, even though so-called abortion rights were not directly under threat this session because of the Minnesota court case Doe v. Gomez, which we've also talked about before. So they also quote Planned Parenthood. There's always a wish list of things that I wish I could, expand and improve, said Dr. Sarah Traxler, Chief Medical Director at Planned Parenthood North Central States. But ultimately, she says it's great, et cetera, et cetera. So I think some great quotes here. With a DFL governor, the stage was set for Minnesota to remake the political landscape on abortion. In less than a year, the party transformed abortion access in ways that surprised even some supporters.
Yeah, no joke, girlie.
I don't think most abortion supporters even want abortion until the moment of birth or for protections for children born alive during an abortion to be nuked. Who wants that? Literally, who wants that? And then Grace discussed the game plan the Democrats have and whether there is one. Here's another quote.
They kind of have one, but then they also don't. It's so weird.
Yeah, exactly. Democrats have discussed, and I'm quoting here again, Democrats have discussed taking another step to safeguard abortion access by putting a constitutional amendment before voters in 2024 or 2026 that would guarantee the right to an abortion. But they've so far not been able to reach agreement on the language for such a proposal. So that's, I think that's, first of all, that should put us on notice. I mean, we as pro-lifers need to realize that our opponents are not going to stop with these legislative gains, but they are very likely to pursue a constitutional amendment that would that would be a huge battle that we would have to fight to keep that from literally putting abortion in the Constitution. Because right now we're in a situation where the court has said abortion is in the Constitution, but that's not really the case. And but Democrats may actually put abortion as an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution. They would at least try. And then in terms of other things abortion clinics want, Shayla Walker, executive director of Our Justice, which I think is so funny, these two groups that are called Justice.
I know. It's like, wow, justice, slaughtering the unborn. Great.
Yeah.
How just.
So she says what we need is an increase in Medicaid reimbursement, so more government money to pay for abortions, and more ways to help people access abortion care, she says. I think this is interesting, this article, so we may see that next session as well, is the point I wanted to make there. I think it's like this article is called Anger to Action, and that really cuts both ways. So I think like if you get into politics, you do realize that anger is a really good motivator in politics. Politicians in general, they want to make people angry. Angry people will be motivated. They'll do whatever that politician wants you to do, and this is true on the right and it's true on the left. No one side has a monopoly on the politics of anger. But my argument would be that the fight for justice for the unborn is a better motivator. And I would take precedent from the fights for justice throughout our history, the fight to ban slavery, the civil rights movement. Those movements took the moral high ground, and it took time, it took generations, but they won, right? So that's what my motivation is. And I think the question for the pro-life movement is then, how do we turn anger that we have in Minnesota, but how do we turn, most of all, our desire for justice into actual action and make change to bring justice for the unborn?
Yeah.
And I think we need to think and pray about that now and soon, because our opportunity to do that, to make positive change, may come a lot sooner than we think. So I just want us to be thinking and praying about that now, so that we are prepared for the day when that comes.
I think it's really good. That's making me think of something one of my pastors said recently. He was preaching a sermon. He was saying, okay, it's really easy to be swept up in the waves of culture. Like, oh, this wave's going this wave's crashing down on us. And it can feel really hopeless sometimes, especially for us in Minnesota. It can feel like, gosh, like these waves keep coming at us. But the pastor said, stop focusing on the waves and pay attention to the tide, because the tide is coming in. And so what he meant by that is Jesus Christ is coming again. He will reign. We are going to win. He controls the tide. The tide is in our favor, even if there are waves that are crashing down on us. And I think it's a beautiful picture of encouragement. So Moses is absolutely right. There's going to come a time very, very soon where we're going to have to really take action. We're already taking action, but there's going to be other pivotal moments like the Dobbs decision in our lifetime, and we're going to have to rise up. Yeah,
in a sense, like let's say that you're 25 or 30. So I'm 31. So in my lifetime, I didn't actually expect to have to fight this battle. I did not think that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. I did not think that abortion laws would be sent back to the states. And now here we are. Here we are with that fight still in front of us. And and as Grace said, it will happen in our lifetimes. We will have that fight. So Grace, switching gears a little bit, we know that the Minnesota Department of Education, we know that they are really interested in pushing a certain agenda on schools. They want comprehensive sex education. They want critical race theory. They want abortion to be part of the curriculum.
Right.
That's another thing that I've seen recently. And you recently found more evidence of this. One of their recent hires that they've made. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me tell you about it. So first of all, they recently hired a quote LGBT education specialist. And this new specialist, his name is Jason Buckland. He thinks that teachers should, quote, explain non-binary identities to preschoolers. Wow, okay.
Good grief.
So he's a specialist for the Minnesota Department of Education. So he's hired by the state. So he's called for teachers to discuss these non-binary identities with preschoolers. He called for that in a 2019 public lecture. That was just unearthed recently. So it was a recorded thing and people found it and everyone was like, wow, this is what he's advocating for in 2019, which, wow, okay. He called for children to learn about sexual orientation, non-binary identities as young as preschool. He recommended then for the older students to have projects to learn that, quote, gender is a social construct. And now in 2023, Buckland he plays a major role in promoting LGBT curriculum and policies in schools throughout the state. So he says, quote, a couple assumptions that get sometimes made when I'm talking about this curriculum. People might assume it's a relatively new program and that work is primarily for high schoolers. We really see the work starting as early as pre-K. So he said that in a 2019 Ed Talk lecture. And I just think, wow, you really coming out there and saying that, dude.
Yeah, saying the quiet part out loud, as they say.
Exactly. He continues, quote, I think about in middle school grades or high school grades, what a fun project it would be to have people research and explore different social constructions of gender across the world throughout time. Because you would see so many examples that don't look like how we structure it here in America. Some cultures have 13 words for gender. Here in America, we've had 2 for a really long time, and we're just now starting to tease that apart. So what a great way to normalize the idea that societies construct gender in their own way.
That's so ridiculous. Like this idea that there's no reason. There's no reason on earth why in American culture there would just be two quote unquote constructions of gender. That has no relationship to any type of biological reality. You can't even talk about biological reality because that in itself would be transphobic.
Blah blah blah.
But like, we've just had two words for gender for a really long time. Grace, I wonder why on earth that would possibly be.
Well, that's in America, but some cultures have 13 words for gender, Moses.
I would
please.
very politely suggest that some other cultures might be very confused. But actually, I actually don't really think that. I think that he's making that up. Like he maybe in
maybe it's like a different word for gender,
yeah,
but I doubt it's like 13 or
well, maybe
13
in Chinese
genders.
they have like a word for tomboy or something like that.
Yeah, who knows?
That doesn't mean that Chinese people don't understand that there are two biological sexes and thus two genders. Chinese people, like everyone else in the world, except for a few mostly white, mostly college-educated liberals in this country and in Northern Europe, everyone else in the world realizes that there are two biological sexes, which translates to two genders.
Boom.
Thank you for listening to my rant. Sorry.
So Buckland has called his decade with this with Minneapolis public schools, quote, life-changing and life-affirming, blah, blah, blah. He shared pictures of the program marching in parade with rainbow accessories and a rainbow pride flag on his social media. I'll conclude with a quote that he said. He said, from LGBTQ student groups to events like QQuest to some of the first gender-inclusive policies in the state, we've been able to do extraordinary work together, and that work will undoubtedly continue. I look forward to what is next for the LGBTQ students, both in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. So there you go, folks. More evidence that the Minnesota Department of Education is trying to sexualize our children. Not surprised, but throwing that out for you guys to be aware of. All right, that was kind of depressing. Moses, please tell our audience what you're reading.
Sure. I just finished a book about, I think I mentioned this before, so I won't dwell on it, about the 1848 revolutions in Europe. And it was actually interesting, and I want to think about this more. In the conclusion, he said that the revolutions, so they had this sort of, they're very different than later revolutions. It's not like the Russian Revolution in 1917, where it's really the left, the left versus the right. Things are much more still in like, things are still very protean, and political affiliations can change and so forth. And he said actually now when sort of political affiliations are sort of breaking down, he mentioned sort of a Trump rally as a place where you can find former liberals and conservatives shouting together, just being really excited about Trump's sort of against the system appeal. And he talked about other examples. So this idea of a breakdown of the post-Cold War liberal world order. And I thought that was really interesting. So that was it was actually quite thought-provoking. I'm also reading kind of a dumb thriller called Recursion by Blake Crouch.
Sometimes you need some fun fiction,
honestly. And it is fun. It's also like extremely derivative. Like it reminds me of other books I've read by him. It reminds me of other books I've read by other people. This idea of time and memory and how changing your memories actually pushes you back into an alternate reality. It's sort of like, okay, it's they talk about Deus Ex Machina. Well, literally in this book, you just sit in a chair and concentrate really hard on a memory, and there's this drug that makes your heart stop, and then when you come back, you're in when they restart your heart, you're in a different memory landscape or something. And it's like, this is fun, but I have to suspend so much disbelief, it's ridiculous. Last book I'm reading just started, St. John of the Cross, The Dark Night of the Soul, which is a really famous phrase, and I don't really know much about the book, but so far he's just talking about the state of the soul at the moment of conversion, and it's really interesting. So. Wow. We'll see what happens there. Kind of a left field read for me. Not my usual fare. What are you reading, Grace?
I can't remember if I mentioned this in the podcast, but I recently read the newest Hunger Games book. It's called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And it was pretty interesting. It was not as good as the other ones.
I did not know that those were still going.
Yeah, she just came out. I don't know how. I think it was like the past 5 years she wrote it. But there's a new movie coming out, so I wanted to read the book
Okay.
first. So I read that a while ago, but I don't think I mentioned it. I'm reading Mere Christendom by Doug Wilson right now. I think you're reading that too.
Oh, I'm not, but I do want to. Definitely on my list.
Yep. Excited about that. It's kind of about like how should we think about Christian nationalism. So very excited. I'm about halfway through Anna Karenina, which I mentioned last time. And then I'm reading, still reading that commentary on Ecclesiastes by Jeffrey Myers, and that's really good. Okay, so that's the list for me. I would like to close out with a verse. It's a short one for this week, but pretty encouraging. So this is 2 Corinthians 13:7. It says, "But we pray to God that you may not do wrong, not that we may appear to have met the test, but that you may do what is right, though we may seem to have failed." And that's really encouraging to me personally, because I think that's a good reminder of, okay, it's easy if you're in the public eye, if you're a politician or if you're a public figure, or let's say if you're a podcaster or something, you're in the public eye. There's a lot of other roles that you can be in the public eye, and it can be easy to want people to affirm what you're doing. You want people to like what you're doing, to say you're doing what's morally right, you're doing what's right in God's eyes. And that's just really us being people pleasers, if that's how we're thinking. And so our prayer, one of our prayers is that not that we'll appear to have met the test, not that we'll appear to have done justice and walked rightly with God, but rather that we have done what is right. And even if in the world's eyes or in some people's eyes, it looks like we have failed, we're praying that we do only right in God's eyes. And so that's encouraging to me, especially in the line of work we're in. So
absolutely. Let that be our prayer, and maybe that will be your prayer this week, guys. Thank you so much again for tuning into the Family Beacon podcast. New episodes every week, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this podcast with a friend if you think that they would be interested in hearing current events on life, family, and religious freedom in Minnesota. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.